I am. I believe I have it recording. I believe we are also broadcasting to Facebook. So hopefully this is our first time ever doing a Zoom that is also being broadcast on Facebook Live. So my name is Krishona Martinson, and I'm the Equine Extension Specialist at the University of Minnesota. And since we've all been living through COVID and have been on quarantine, weekly we've been trying to do Facebook Lives for horse owners on educational topics. Since my area of expertise is forages, we've had a lot of hay and pasture, and we needed something new. So luckily, my good friend, Dr. Bob Coleman from the University of Kentucky, and he has a position very similar to mine here in Minnesota. And Dr. Bob is going to talk about bits. And obviously, by the number of you joining on Zoom and on Facebook, we know that this is a very popular topic with a wonderful speaker. So Dr. Bob, as people are kind of getting on and we're making sure everything's working, maybe you and I can just chit chat how did we meet, Dr. Bob?
You sent me an email and asked if I would do something like today, not a live chat, but if I would participate as an extension person in a research project. That was a year or two ago, and I almost missed getting to meet you that first time because instead of landing in Minneapolis, they sent me to someplace way up in northern Minnesota close to a lake, and it was like, I have to get back to an important meeting. I have people I have to meet. So I was, but we started there, and we've kind of had a good opportunity to work together on a wide variety of things, and seems that we always seem to be able to come up with something new to challenge each other.
Yeah, I think that is certainly true, and really probably our biggest research project that also Dr. Jennifer Earing was a part of early on is when we weighed and body condition scored, I don't know, thousands of horses that we eventually put into the Healthy Horse app. So you and I have traversed many states and many different environments weighing and body condition scoring horses.
And that was actually a lot of fun. I think it really showed from an extension standpoint what we need to do and how we need to try to be, that sounds really trite, but with the people and go and talk to them and find out what they were really interested in. And when you think about it, and I've gone through a couple of times and counted up, but it's like 18 or 19 different breeds. Yeah. We have, as you said, we've been across the country. We have met people from across North America when we've been doing things. And I think probably the most interesting thing for me is that we've been able to meet people that we know or had some connection with somewhere in our lives. And it didn't matter where. And really shows that the horse industry is kind of a neat group of people that, like today is showing up, that people just want to learn something, and I look at it, and hopefully today, everybody, when we finally get going, I don't have all the answers. Heck, I don't even have all the questions. But I'll share with you what I have, and we can go from there, and hopefully we'll all get to learn something. Somebody might learn something brand new. Some people it might be, oh, I already knew that, and so two of us know it, so that's good, and that's all right. And somebody else might want to question, should I do this or should I do that? I'm not a horse trainer. I'm an extension horse specialist like Krishona, but I become very curious about this particular topic. But really, I'm just curious about horses.
Well, and I think that's a perfect segue, Dr. Bob, is that I'm in my boring home office with my husband's bowling trophy behind me. Everybody thinks it's a horse trophy. Sadly, it is not. But look at your beautiful setting. You are in your tack room, and one of your expertise areas that you've developed over the years is on bits and bitting, and you actually teach a class on that. So I'm going to turn it solely over to you, let you go through the different bits and the information that you can share. And those of you joining either on Facebook Live or on Zoom, Facebook Live, you can type in a comment. I believe it will pop up on the screen as a question. And those of you on Zoom, if you type in the chat box, which if you take your mouse and kind of hover around the bottom of the screen, you can enter in the chat. Dr. Bob, don't you worry about that. If it is related to the bit you're talking about, I will politely interrupt you. And if not, we'll wait until the end. So without further ado, take it away, Dr. Bob.
Thanks, Krishona. And thanks to everybody for showing up today. Great way to spend a Thursday with a lot of horse people. Yeah, I teach a class. I spend a lot of time talking about bits, much to the displeasure, I think, of some of the students, but it's a tack and equipment class. And we started it because the students were at an activity and they felt very uncomfortable completing the activity. They couldn't put bridles together. They couldn't identify different pieces of equipment. And, they knew if they were a hunter person, they might know something about hunters, but they didn't know anything about Western, and vice versa. So we kind of started doing that. And then I also teach a bidding class relative to my extension appointment. So the place that I always like to start, and it's the one place that we seem to have the greatest amount of confusion, is what do we call these things? And yeah, they're bits. I get that, but and we know what they'll say in the tack catalog, or what it might say hanging on the wall at the tack store, but don't always believe that that's actually correct. And there are some things within our culture and the different cultures within the horse industry that we call stuff what we call it. Why? I don't know. We've just always done it that way. So the place I always start is really simple and really basic. And I'll try not to turn back and forth too many times, but what do we call the bit? So pretty simple. Hopefully, wish I had an extra hand, but I think most of us would agree that this is what we would call a snaffle bit. And there are people that would say it's a snaffle bit because it is a jointed mouthpiece. Well, okay, but maybe not. Does that mean that all jointed mouthpieces are snaffle bits? Versus this one, are tried and true. It is in the catalog, and it is called a Tom Thumb Snaffle. It is not a snaffle. Now, this one doesn't have the curb strap on it, but there's a place for a curb strap. It has shanks. This is a leverage bit. So really what it is it's a leverage bit with a jointed mouthpiece, not a snaffle. And I know we all get confused about that. And this is certainly a good one to start with, because some people either love these or they hate them. And if you have a love relationship with Tom Thumb bits and you want some more, I have an extremely large collection of them. And I might be willing to part with one or two. The other thing that we also have to think about when we're back staying with the snaffle is this straight bar bit, but it's also a snaffle bit, because like this jointed one, and I don't know if I can, that sort of works. They're designed to have direct pressure, and the parts of the horse that they impact, and we'll come back to what the leverage bits impact later, but these are going to have an impact on the horse's tongue, the bars of his mouth right there, but prior to the premolars, that nice sensitive area, not got a lot of covering over top of that bone, and on the corners of the horse's mouth. Now, this bit, and depending on who's riding, could also have an impact on the horse's roof of his mouth. So if you pull really hard, it's going to pinch down, and it does what we commonly call nut crackering. And if you want to find out how much it can hurt, take your snaffle bit, put your finger in it, and then get a friend to squeeze till you say ouch. And there's some that will make you say ouch very quickly. But if I pull really hard on this, and depending on how my horse's mouth is, this can actually hit him in the roof of the mouth. So the basic parts, though, are on his tongue, on the bars, on the corners or the cheek parts, and potentially the roof of his mouth. Whereas this straight bar, it's going to lay on his tongue. It's got a little bit of a curve to it, have a little bit of tongue relief for him. It'll pressure on the bars and certainly on the corners, not going to touch the roof of his mouth. we'll come back to the curb bits and where they impact when we start looking at those. But if we can diverge for just a second, one of the things that a lot of times people ask is, and these are common, whether we're talking about a curb bit or a snaffle bit, is what are they made out of? And what are some of the things about the bit that are common? And what's really common is they all have mouthpieces. And so how does the mouthpiece actually impact the horse? And so we can look at it depending on what it's made out of. We can look at it as to how thick it is. We can think about it, is there some structural changes to it that are unique? And how do they impact how the horse actually deals with the bit, or how we get the bit to function and get the horse to respond to us? Because really all that bit is, it's a part of the communication. It's not the be all and end all, it's just part. And I think a lot of times we want to do things and correct the horse with our hands through the bit, instead of thinking about how do we need to correct our horse with all of us functioning along with our hands in the bit. I ride a horse right now that he's got some neat buttons, and if I push the right ones, I get a really good ride. If I don't push them, he just stands there and is a little ornery. But if I ask him gently with my hand, and then also use my leg to reinforce my hand and use the right leg or the correct leg, then I get a great response. It's kind of like that thing that's been on Facebook with the Peanuts cartoons. I think it's Linus, or it's either Charlie Brown and Snoopy, you know, outside rein, inside leg. That's really an important thing to think about. So when we think about, the first thing about bits is the size of the mouthpiece. And I have my University of Minnesota horse program pencil to give you a bit of a perspective. I think, Krishona, you gave this to, I'm pretty sure I didn't steal it. But, you know, how big is the mouthpiece? The smaller the mouthpiece, the more concentrated the pressure when we apply pressure with the reins. Now, if we go with this one, which is quite a bit larger, and everybody would say, well, it's larger, so it must be softer. It is going to dissipate the pressure more, but this big one, and I can't imagine what kind of horse used to carry this. He liked it because it's got chew marks all over it, or he didn't like it because it's got chew marks all over it. But think about it, he better have a good sized mouth and lots of room to take this huge capacity, because, hopefully you can kind of get a bit of an idea, but look at how much more there is to this bit compared to this one. And so if we put this in and it's more bit from a capacity standpoint than that horse can tolerate, it's going to be very uncomfortable. So softer because of the pressure maybe, but completely uncomfortable in his mouth. And think about it, when you put on too small of shoes, they're not terribly comfortable. We put that bit in his mouth, he's going to want to keep his mouth open, which, depending on our discipline, may annoy us. It may really aggravate us. And then what we're going to do, we're going to try and tie his mouth shut. So what does that do? It just adds to the horse's discomfort, and we're not going to get the job done that we want. So we need to think about, how does it fit in his mouth? And while a little larger is going to dissipate the pressure, it doesn't necessarily make it the right one. Then the other thing, and I get asked a lot, what should it be made of? Well, there's a lot of things we make bits out of. There's the old school thing, and it might not be as easily seen, but you know, the good old sweet iron, cold rolled steel that they used to make bits out of, you know, 150 years ago. Probably the kind of stuff they made bits out of way back in, you know, 2,000 and 3,000 years ago. It's called sweet iron. I've looked to find a reason for that, and I'm not sure why they call it that. The horses tend to like it. They will hold it. They will move it around. They will salivate more with one of these in their mouths. And a lot of people really like these. They tend to be a little heavier. And a lot of times, I know we did a activity with our students a number of years ago, and I gave them 2 bridles to pick which one was the correct one. One had a brand new, shiny stainless steel bit, and the other one had this one. This one was the correct bridle. And they wouldn't put it on because they thought that because it was slightly rusty, it was really nasty and we shouldn't put it in the horse's mouth. Yet, at the end of the day, when we put it in, the horse really settled down and liked this one. So this, because of salivation, and if we can get the horses to salivate, keeps their mouth and their jaw a little softer, and they tend to go along better. The
Dr.
other one,
Bob, around that, we have a question. Is salivating a good or bad indicator of bit fit intolerance?
well, there's some debate about that. It's a good question. In the dressage world, there is some concern that if the horse is salivating a lot, maybe even frothing at the mouth because he's really been chewing on it, that's supposed to be a sign, a positive sign, to the point where they will actually put a kind of a frothy material. It's made out of sugar, and they will rub it around so that the horse looks like he's really comfortable. I was taught that yes, if they're salivating more and they're working on the bit, they tend to have a more relaxed mouth. We actually used to, when I showed Hackney ponies and I worked for gentlemen, we actually used to put glucose on the bit and actually to get them to chew on the bit. And these bits were all wrapped with a latex material in order to keep them really soft in their mouth. And I don't know if it helped or not. I know we had one that if you gave him an inch, he would take about 8 miles before you could get him stopped. So I always hated it when we did that, because cleaning tack and ponies after that was really nasty. Getting that glucose that had been salivated on and then sprayed all over the harness and all over the front of the pony was never fun. But I do think that if they're kind of quiet in their mouth, there'll be some salivation, but I don't think there should be an excessive amount. And then copper, a lot of people talk about copper, and again, great for creating salivation. There are different kinds of copper coming out. There's more of copper alloys. One's called cyprium, but there's a number of them. They're not 100% copper. They're a little harder. They'll last a little longer, and they're a little cheaper. Copper's pretty expensive, so getting some of those really high. And then there's some of the other materials that people use. So there's other materials, other metals that people use. We use stainless steel. Titanium is one. I don't have a titanium bit because they are frightfully expensive, and I'm not allowed to spend that much just to hang it in on a wall in my basement. But their titanium is really strong, really light, very bio friendly. We use titanium for surgical procedures. People have pieces of titanium to fix things. I have a piece of titanium in my head, so it doesn't seem to bother me at all. Quite light, and it's all good. But then the other things that we've been using, and we've been using them for a long time, are things like rubber. Rubber bits, depending on how they are constructed. This is a rubber bit. I actually like this when I saw it, and that's the reason why I bought it. I've never used it, but it's a little smaller than some of the old style rubber bits. They tended to be really big, and you had to wonder how comfortable those were, and you would actually see horses chew on them a lot. So you'd see that at this end of the bit, or the rubber would be all chewed off because, and I guess if you're really checking, we were doing a digestibility study, Krishona would be able to see where that rubber went because it wouldn't be digestible, and wouldn't be a good marker, so we wouldn't do it for that. But, you know, is it softer? I guess a little bit. I don't know how, when we talk to our horses, I don't know how we ask them, you know, which one tastes better? If they're comfortable in their mouth, they're not being really fussy, maybe that's good enough. And then certainly this man-made material, this happens to be a happy mouth. There's a lot of these. I got this one because the person that bought it for their horse, the horse was unhappy, didn't like it. So I traded a really good bit that I paid $1.98 for, and I got this one. And I mean, these bits are, she probably give between $25 and $30 for this. So I did a really good bit of trading to get one for not much money. Some horses like them, some horses don't. Nothing is a guarantee just because of what we talk about. This one's really, interesting, and I don't think this one was, and I'm not going to do a taste test to prove it one way or the other, but some of them, they will have apple flavoring on the bars, and the centerpiece will be peanut butter. And I've actually seen them advertised that way. I don't know if horses like peanut butter or not. It might make them really, I mean, if it was a glob of peanut butter, Mr. Ed used to get peanut butter every time he went on television so that he would do the lip thing. So whether he liked it or not, I don't know.
Oh, Dr. Bob?
Yep.
A couple questions. So why is that particular bit called a happy mouth? And what exactly does that second break do? And then about what you're just speaking as, so that was the first part. The second was, is in general, I think this question is kind of like, what is preferred? You mentioned stainless steel, you mentioned the rubber, you mentioned the copper, and I'm sure it has something to do with the desired outcome in the horse. But so just first of all, the happy horse and that second break, and then also, you know, the pros and cons of the different materials.
Okay. I'm going to come back to the second break in a minute. I will. You jumped ahead of me, but thank you very much for keeping up and keeping me on track. Happy Mouth, this actually is a trade name. That's what they call it. And it is a man-made kind of neoprene type of material that, again, is to be softer in the horse's mouth, maybe facilitate them chewing a little bit and having a more relaxed mouth. As I say, which one's the best? It depends on your horse. That's a very extension answer. It depends. You may also have a preference of how your horses respond to what you put in the horse's mouth. So stainless steel doesn't have much taste to it. From what they say, I don't know who's done the taste test. I don't actually taste any of the bits that I buy. That would be really scary. I prefer the cold rolled steel, the sweet iron bits. So most of my bits have either a cold rolled steel mouthpiece, or if I'm using copper, I have one bit that if we get to it, I'll show you that it's got copper rollers on the bars that seem to keep the horse really happy. Was very content with it. I think it comes down to you know, what your horse really likes, and to say one's better than the other. I have ridden horses with stainless steel bits. I've ridden, as I say, I'm riding now a lot of the cold rolled steel, the sweet iron. I have used copper bits. I have used a rubber bit. That was a disaster because I had no level of respect. It did give him something to chew on, and I think the horse got kind of comfortable carrying something in his mouth, but in order to actually get him to respond and respect my cues with my hands, I had to switch out of that. So in a lot of cases, it's really hard to answer that. I would look at, you know, something that's going to last long. If you don't mind a little bit of rust on the mouthpiece, and we're actually starting to see bits being manufactured where they'll have a stainless steel shank or a stainless steel ring, and then they'll have a steel mouthpiece or they'll have a copper mouthpiece, and they'll mix and match the metals. There's also one, and I don't know exactly what the metal is. It's called a no rust bit. We see them in some of the English disciplines, and those bits come out of England. They're fairly old, and it's an old technology. They're kind of almost look a little bit like the German silver will go in the color that it becomes, but they never rust. And but I also wonder if nobody ever asked the horse if they liked it or not. If they go along and do their job, they're probably fairly comfortable. One that I would stay away from or I would watch for is some of the chromed bits, because that chrome will come apart. And that gives really nice little jagged edges on the mouthpiece. It's going to be very uncomfortable for your horse. And so if I was looking at buying a used bridle that had a used bit, I would really not want a bit that had chrome on it, because a lot of that stuff, when you clean it up, it will all just flake off. And it never flakes off cleanly, and it never flakes off smoothly. So.
All right, Dr. Bob, we had a question, two questions, and then I know you want to we got to keep going here. Would that happy mouth bit apply direct or indirect pressure? So maybe talk about that. And then you also mentioned a few times when you get a bit cleaning, can you also just walk through some of the recommended cleaning strategies when you buy a used bit?
Okay, so this one happens to be a direct pressure bit. And we might as well answer the multiple mouthpiece one so we can get that. We'll kill two birds with one stone. So if you remember, we'll use this one. So it's going to bend in the middle and it's going to pinch. It's going to nutcracker because of the way it's built. If we go with a third piece, it's not going to nutcracker him. So it takes some of the pressure off of his tongue. And for some horses, it makes them much more comfortable. They don't like you grabbing their tongue with the bit. So it just helps a little bit. So you can have this kind. I've got this one. There's also the French link that looks like a little dog bone. You'll see some of the other ones, they call it a dog bone, and it actually looks like that. Kind of looks like a little dog bone treat. And so it just keeps it from pinching as much on the horse's tongue, aids in some comfort. Versus this one, which this is called a Dr. Bristol. And so this link is actually flat. And when it sits on the horse's tongue, it sits with the edge right on the tongue. So when I pull on it, that edge is going to dig into his tongue and give you a lot more pressure on the tongue, and hopefully a little more respect that when you say whoa and pull back, that he knows you mean business. It was actually invented years ago in England by, believe it or not, Dr. Bristol. And it was primarily for carriage horses. And one of the things I read about it is, you know, if you've got your carriage horse or you need to get it stopped, you know, he's out there at the end of 30 feet of leather. It's not like we can do the one rein magic stop or do whatever to get him stopped when we're sitting on his back. If he's out there at the end of the shafts and we're back in the cab and we've got very wealthy people riding in our cab, we can't have them run away because then they don't tip. So you got to get them back. So it just depends on how it sits in his mouth, and the multiple mouthpieces are, it doesn't matter if it is a snaffle and a direct pressure bit or if it is a multiple jointed shank bit. It all does the same thing, and it impacts how it grabs the tongue. How I clean my bits, really quickly, I use citric acid. You can buy it on Amazon, comes in a powder. I put a couple of tablespoons in a bucket of water, typically hot water, get it all dissolved, drop the bit in there, and watch it for, a few hours. If it's really rusty, it'll take a little while, but when it really starts to work, it'll start to bubble around the bit. And then just take it out. I use steel wool. I scrub it up really good, wipe it off, rinse it off really good, and they seem to turn out really well. They'll end up, I don't know how easy it is to see this one, but I mean, it was in nasty shape, and it cleaned up pretty good. I actually cleaned up one and found out that it was a U.S. cavalry bit from the 1890s, and was kind of excited about that. The last thing that, and we've looked at a few where we had a ring snaffle. We can have our D-rings, depending on which discipline you ride. I mean, this would be a Western D-ring versus a hunter D-ring. You'll have some people tell you that if it's not jointed, it can't be a D-ring snaffle. I also have a friend that always wants to challenge us. Why is this called a D ring? It's just a D. And so there, and then the other one we have, we call it the egg butt. And again, you're going to have some preferences. Which one do you want? These ones are more stable in the horse's mouth. The mouthpiece doesn't move as much. When you have a ring snaffle, you get not only lateral movement, but you will get vertical movement. So the mouthpiece moves more in the horse's mouth, which may, on a young horse, cause him some confusion. What exactly are you telling me to do? I don't understand. So you need to think about that. And then lastly, we have the one that we will see, the full cheek snaffle. They come in two forms, this kind, and then there's also another one where the ring is independent. The rein ring is independent. That's called a Fulmer. I just didn't bring one. I got my little keepers on here because theoretically you're supposed to have your keepers on when you put it on the bridle, except if you're the man from Snowy River. He does not use keepers on his bridle. Just you watch the movie, see if I'm not right. These give you tremendous lateral pressure, if you can think about it. But when you read about full cheek snaffles, one of the things they always say, the reason for the large wings is so that you cannot pull the bit through the horse's mouth. Oh my goodness. If you're pulling so hard to go right that you're pulling the left side through that horse's mouth, you need to get off because you are really doing something wrong. And poor old Nellie needs a new rider. Sorry, maybe you need a new horse, but that always amazes me. But a lot of people don't always put the keepers on. You watch event riders, they'll have this. They may or may not have the keepers. It helps to give you that lateral pressure. It keeps it in the right place, and hopefully it also keeps it from getting caught somewhere. So just the whole thing. And but at the end of the day, when you think about snaffle bits, they're really probably the simplest because they have a ring, they have a mouthpiece, we're done. A little difference in the mouthpiece, but you know, it's pretty simple. You put them on the bridle, put them in the horse's mouth, attach some reins, and get on and go. When we get to the curb bits, oh, one other thing I was going to, well, if somebody asked, we'll talk about those. When we get to the curb bits, like this, depending on what the mouthpiece is, we get to think about all the parts. And again, what parts of the horse is this going to put pressure on? Well, same as the snaffle bit to start with. The tongue, because it's on his mouth, it's going to lay on his tongue. So depending on the structure of the bit and the mouthpiece, how much pressure is there. We're going to put pressure on the bars. We're going to have pressure on the cheeks, depending on how you set the bit in the horse's mouth, put the bridle on. But because there's a curb chain, we're also going to put pressure on the curb and the pull. And depending on the structure of the bit, you may or may not affect the roof of the horse's mouth. Everybody looks at the curb bits and say, oh, look at that, they're just horrible. Well, they aren't. They really aren't. I have a good friend that we always have debates about bits, and he said, you know, I can do just as much damage to a tongue with a snaffle bit as I can with a ported bit. Maybe more. Well, it's like, yeah, maybe more, because if they're not listening and you're pulling harder, that could be the issue. So you need to think about that. So when we think about...
Can I ask you a couple questions before you move on to the curb bits?
Yep.
Just a clarifying question on what exactly makes a snaffle bit. And then in the little dog piece that you showed, what is a technical term for that center flat piece in your Dr. Bristol bit?
Good question. I'm not sure there is an absolute name for the Dr. Bristol bit. They actually just call it the center piece from the Dr. Bristol. On the other one, they call it a French link, and that's where the dog bone. And they'll actually identify it as, in some cases, more on the Western side, they call it a dog bone. On the English side, it would just be called a French link, and it's just the center link. And then there's a lot of different links. It's kind of like that Happy Mouth that had kind of a round thing. I've got some that have rollers on them. A wide variety of things. There are also some that will have a set of keys attached to it. So it'll be a round ring, just a round ring. I have some like that. I have some that are a round ring that have little things hanging off of them that are supposed to keep the horse from putting his tongue where you don't want it to do, and maybe placate the horse. And I just think that it's an awful lot of stuff to stick in the horse's mouth. But some people that have used them get along with them great. I've not had very much success with that. But why does it make it a snaffle bit? It's because it's direct pressure. What I pull on here, if I pull 5 pounds of pressure on the right side, the horse feels 5 pounds of pressure. It's direct pressure. There is no mechanical advantage to this bit. And it doesn't matter whether it's a rings or an egg butt. I have no mechanical advantage over the horse. So what I can pull, that's what he feels. Whereas if I have a leverage bit, it's kind of like the teeter-totter. If I change my fulcrum on my teeter-totter, a little person can launch a big person. It's just physics. And for those of you that took physics way back when in school and you're thinking, when will I ever need that? That's the only time I've ever used physics. It is about fulcrum and launching somebody that I needed to get an advantage over, or trying to move a big rock or trying to do something. So that's basically what it is direct pressure on the snaffle. And so what the mouthpiece is immaterial. And there is just as much variety. We could be here for hours if I brought out all my snaffle bits. And I've got some mouthpieces on snaffle bits that everybody thinks the snaffle is the gentlest, kindest, whatever bit going. I've got some that I can tear a tongue out with, I promise you. They're brand new, they've never been used. I have one that's pretty mean. I bought it at the Rolex when it was Rolex many years ago, and I asked the girl when I checked out, I said, so is this bit legal? And she said, it has to be. Everybody's buying those ones. It's like, no, that's consumerism. That's not got anything to do with what's legal or not. It's kind of like, I know nobody in the audience ever drives above posted speeds or better. And only if you get caught is illegal. So if we move on, when we've got our shank bits, we've got two choices, two basic choices. So we can have, how is my shank attached? Easily, so that it moves, and you'll get some that this is actually a ball, and they will swivel all over the place. So you really need to have a good idea of how you're using it. But here's one of those ones. It's got a sweet iron mouthpiece, and it's got aluminum shank, so it's nice and light. Versus, oh, I guess we'll use this one because it's pretty. It's got a solid shank. So my message is going to be a little different, and I got to remember that. If I have a solid shank bit, when I pull on this side, it translates right straight across. When I have this one, I have a little more flexibility in how the message travels across the horse's mouth. And it becomes your, and before somebody asks, which is the best, I don't know. I have one horse that I ride. I ride him in a bit that looks like this, only it has a jointed mouthpiece because he and I get along really well with that. Versus other horse that I ride, he goes in this, which is a solid shank, has a little more lift to it, which reduces my leverage component, but I don't need a whole lot on him. But I do know that it's quite a bit of bit in his mouth. I got to be fairly careful when how I ask my question, when I want to respond. So I need to think about that. But I can have difference in shanks. I can have a difference in shank length. The longer the shank, the more leverage I have. Except for one, and I don't know if I have one here, but if we look at, here's a better one. This one's maybe a little better. So if we think about it from a shank standpoint, so we have two parts. We have the shank in some people's minds, or the cheek, and this is the shank, and this is the purchase. So what we want to look at is, what is the ratio between the purchase and the shank? So this makes up the whole cheek. It's really confusing because depending on what books you read, they mix them all up, and I just wish they would understand how confusing that actually is. But we measure from here to get the purchase, and then from here to the ring, to where the rein pull is, not to the bottom. Now, if we have anybody on that rides walking horses or mountain horses, you measure to the bottom. That's just the way you do it. Who's right? I don't know. It's just the way they do it. But if I have a really small purchase and a really long shank, what's my ratio? I'm going to have way more leverage. If I lengthen this, I reduce my leverage. So back to the teeter-totter. The one in the playground is going to have it right smack dab in the middle. So the leverage for either side is exactly the same. So if you have a short one, that's why the one I'm riding has got a little more purchase. That's one of the reasons why I bought it, because I like that. And then I'm going to look at what's the dynamic of my shank. Is it going to be straight? Is it going to be swept back like this one? So I have, and as I go from straight to more angle, I reduce the speed of the message and I reduce some of my leverage because it's already bent back. So this is maybe a little softer and gentler than a straight one. Now that's not to say that we can't ride with a straight one, because we can. We just need to realize that when you pick up on your hand and ask with your shank bit, particularly if you're riding with one-handed, that you're going to have a very instant movement of the message. There's no tape delay going on. Whereas if you've got this grazer, which is what we call it now, this is actually not the original grazer, by the way. The original grazer was a short shank bit so that the horse, and I don't know how this would have worked in Texas. Of course, their bits were really short because their grass is really short. But if you had a long shank bit trying to graze in Texas without taking the bridle off, never going to work. Frustrate that poor horse, as his lips are, just inches away from that grass. So they actually, whereas this one, when he puts his head down, this will bend up and give him a little bit of an opportunity. So a little bit of a fun fact. But that's just going to change your message. And again, whichever one works for you. You will see some, and I think this one's not a bad example. It's got, if I untangle it, got a curve in it. And what does that do? Well, I still measure from here to here in a straight line. This gives me a little more material, so it gives me a little more weight in how the bit works. The other thing I like about this one is when it sits in his mouth, it sits like this, and my curb strap is disengaged. When I pick up on it, it engages my curb strap, but as soon as I let go, and because he puts his head where it's supposed to be, or he does what he's supposed to do, and I let go, he gets instant relief. So I kind of like it when they do that. You'll see some bits that are actually have the port bent forward, which is not traditional in some disciplines, but it is in others, and that just affects how it impacts on the horse's tongue. So the biggest thing about curb bits that everybody looks at is, oh, they have the port. And what is the port for? Come here. All right, this is one, I love taking this one to class because everybody looks at it and goes, oh, you can't put that in the horse's mouth. And it's like, well, sure you can. You just hold it in your hand and put your finger in and slide it in, and it'll lay there. This is actually what's called a signal bit. Because when he holds his head where it's supposed to, this is going to lay comfortably on his tongue and not bother him. Now, if I pick up on the reins and I reach for the sky, I'm going to jab him in the roof of his mouth. There's no question about that. But if he's broke, and then the really critical part, if I'm broke, to ride with one of these shouldn't be a big deal. But really what ports do is, in addition to having some palate pressure, they also give tongue relief. It gives him a place to put his tongue. And how much he needs will depend on the horse. And you'll see a lot of different ones the way they're structured. Some of the new things they're doing now is they are actually moving this so there's a little more of a gap here and a little more angle. And again, to make it more comfortable to the horse. What's important relative to palate pressure is, in the average horse, I don't know what they look like, but the average horse, this measurement needs to be at least 2 inches or it won't touch the roof of his mouth. So there's lots. So I got this one. Really pretty, very straight, like this, very straight shank. Gonna have a little bit of tongue relief right here, but it's never gonna touch the roof of his mouth. There's not, unless he is such a shallow-mouthed horse that he probably can't even fit that in his mouth. But a lot of people look at it and say, oh, it's got a port, so it's horrible. Nope, nope, nope. It depends on what you're doing, how broke the horse is, how broke you are. And I don't know how many of you have done this. I don't know why I have. I really don't, but I have, just because. So on Wyatt, that's the horse I ride with this. He's mine. There's a little bit of tongue in here. I actually do look in his mouth. My dentist said I should do that because my other horse, Eli, that I ride, has weird teeth. And he said one day, he said, "Do you ever look in his mouth?" I said, "Sure, every time I put the bridle on." He said, "You look at both sides when you put the bridle on?" I was like, "No, why would you do that?" He said, "You need to come and look at the right side of this horse's mouth." Big difference. So I actually now, not every day, but I do check to see how is this fitting? Where's it sitting in his mouth? Just mostly because I'm curious. So we have all kinds of.
So Dr. Bob, are you able to take some questions?
Sure.
So here's the problem. We only have 10 minutes left, which everybody has commented how they enjoy listening to your humor and they love your bit collection in your tack room. So we'll get that out there. But a couple of the questions they have is I had one person ask your thoughts on bitless bridles.
Okay. So I'm going to put the question back and then I will actually answer it. But so what's a bitless bridle? There are a number of, there is the Dr. Cook bitless bridle that is designed to work off pressure, goes over their nose, goes underneath, and then puts pressure on them so they don't have to have a bit in their mouth. They work really well. Some of the people in the contest arena ride with a bitless bridle. It's called a Hackamore, a mechanical Hackamore. There are people that ride with a Bosel or a Basel or a Bossel, however, wherever you live in the free world and you want to say it. They all work off pressure rather than and pressure on the nose and to a certain degree on the chin and the side of the face in order to get the horse to respond. If you've got, in a lot of cases, where did they come from? The Bosel came as a transition period for the horse while they were changing their teeth. And it's from the Vaquero tradition, very specific, and you really need to know how to use those things to use them properly. I have ridden a horse with one, not properly, and I'm glad to still be here today to tell you because he ran off, but that's another story. The bitless bridles that Dr. Cook came out with was because some people are worried about how much we trap the horse's tongue, and does it impact his ability to swallow? Does it impact his ability to be comfortable? And there's lots of debate and discussion on that. There's a lot of people who ride with them and love them. They actually really came from the Arabian area of North Africa. That's where they first came from. There are people and cultures, horse cultures, way back when that they actually rode in them. So we've had bits for about 3,000 years. We probably had bitless bridles in one form or fashion for many, many years. They work well. Like all bits, they're not cheap to get the good ones. Don't be, penny wise and pound foolish. I mean, buy high quality ones. I have one, and I actually can't believe it. I might have put it away. I have one that's a biothane one. That's pretty cool, and I got to play with it a little bit more and put it on some horses and maybe get bold enough to get on and ride with it just to see how life goes. But if you've got a horse that's got some mouth problems, certainly if you're just out there riding and you're not competing, it's not a big deal. In a lot of places, it's amazing. Despite what we believe that they provide more comfort for the horse, a lot of disciplines won't allow them in the show ring, which makes it really tough.
All right, thank you so much. The last question that I'm going to ask you for your final thoughts. What is your opinion or thoughts on twisted mouthpieces?
And I left my collection of twisted mouthpieces in the inventory section. Oh, twisted mouthpieces. I think any of the mouthpieces that are of a different texture, whether it be this, got a lot of edge to it, a lot of bite, um, probably going to get your horse's attention fairly quickly. Uh, you may actually get some attention that you don't want because it's going to hurt. I mean, this is a really good one if you've got one of these. This one's not too bad because of the way it's built. It doesn't pinch my finger all that bad. I've got another one that, I mean, it really hurts. You don't want to pinch it for long. I mean, this one's got edge as well, not as much, and they're a little rounded. Uh, being a copper bit, it's been smoothed out somewhat. Uh, if you need to get the horse's attention because they're bulling through the bridle on you, they're not paying attention, you know, riding once or twice in a row with this just to get them to be respectful again, probably something to think about. Do you ride in it all the time? I think you have to be careful to do that because at some point in time, we're going to put enough pressure in his mouth and on those sensitive tissues that they're going to become numb. Think about it. When you first start having to haul hay and handle all those square bales, your hands are pretty sore after the first day, unless you do a lot of, for me, my hands would be crippled. They would hurt so much because they're kind of soft. But after 2 or 3 days and I'm building up calluses, it doesn't hurt so much anymore, to the point where it doesn't hurt at all. And all of a sudden we're going to lose respect for what we want to do. So I can see somebody knowledgeable about how these work using them. There's the twisted wires, the fairly thick twisted wires. They're probably about a 5/8 inch diameter, 1/2 inch to 5/8 of an inch diameter mouthpiece. They got a little roll to them, but they're smooth. They will, again, give you a little different message and you may get some respect. I also have one that's about the same as number 9 wire, and it's a double twisted wire. You can really hurt one with that. And again, I actually got that one. A gentleman had asked the lady at the tack store in central Kentucky to buy him order him the smallest twisted wire she could find, and she did. And he looked at it and he said, "I could never ride with that. That's horrible. I can't do that." He said, "I'm not going to buy it." She said, "I ordered what you asked for." So I bought it from her because just to have. I think those got to be really careful. Think about what you need to get done. And if your whole goal should be to use the lightest, simplest, least intrusive bit that you possibly can get, where your horse is going to be comfortable and your horse is going to do what you want him to do. There are some that people are going to look at and say, "That's a lot of bridle." Yep. But if the person riding knows that and appreciates that, I don't think it's that big a deal. I mean, I would love one day to ride a spade bit horse. I don't ride good enough. I don't have good enough hands. I don't have a good enough seat. I can't yet. One day, it's on my bucket list. I'm going to ride one of those because they're really cool. And if you watch those guys' hands, it hardly moves because they're not, it's a signal. They move their hand, the bit moves, they know that a leg's coming, and they know to move off their leg. They're not moving off the bit. They're moving off the rest of the horse, the rest of the rider's signals. And that's what I think we really need to get to, is that let's just use something as light as we can. A trainer from many years ago, one of the first people that really started doing some of the horsemanship lectures. I mean, Tom Dorrance and those guys were doing them in certain parts of the U.S., but this guy came from the U.S. and was traveling across North America, was Monty Foreman. And in his book, he actually says, if people would use a simpler bit, they'd have less problems.
Well, Dr. Bob, I think that that is an awesome note to end on. Like you said, you want to use the lightest tool for the job, whatever that may be, and the training of the rider is of equal importance, if not maybe more, than the training of the horse when it comes to bits.
Well, and one last comment. Everybody says it's all in the rider's hands. Nope, it's in the rider's head, because your head controls everything that you do. So just think about it. And if you're not sure, ask. There's a lot of people out there most happy to try to answer your question.
And actually, Bob, finally, one more question, and hopefully your wife isn't listening. Everybody's dying to know how many bits you have in your collection.
457 catalog. As you noticed on some of the ones, I'm working on getting them all numbered and identified.
But it's for teaching purposes, so that is why. Like, I mean, I think we would all love to take your bits and bitting class. I sure would.
Well, it's fun. I take all this junk stuff with me, all these treasures.
Well, everybody is just so impressed, Dr. Bob. Thank you. Everybody's saying thank you. I can see Facebook on one screen and Zoom on the other. And I just can't thank you enough. This was absolutely wonderful. I will send the recording. And if any of you have additional questions, it's very easy to Google Dr. Bob Coleman at the University of Kentucky. His lovely photo and all of his information will pop right up. So Dr. Bob, thank you so much for Minnesota. I'm so glad we're colleagues, and we'll have to do this again based on the response. So I really appreciate it.
You bet. Take care. Thanks, everybody.